Caleb thought he could survive 7 nights with the silent girl from the woods. But the real question was, could he survive himself? He married her for a bet. By the 7th night, he couldn't remember what it felt like to lie. The flap burst open with a snap of canvas, and Caleb Markham staggered into the clearing like he'd been struck blind. His breath came in ragged bursts, half-choked sobs swallowed by the wind. One sleeve was gone, the other hung in tatters. His chest gleamed slick with blood in the lantern light, some his own, some not. His hands clutched the shredded remnants of a black veil, the silk torn and clotted with feathers still wet. They dripped onto the frostbitten grass with a sound that was somehow louder than the wind. "She's not what we thought," he rasped. Then again, louder, raw, cracking. "She's not what we thought." Somewhere in the distance, the trees answered. Not with words, not with crows, but with a sound like bones being sifted through dry leaves. The horses tethered nearby bucked and reared in place, wide-eyed and white with foam, their hooves stamping the dirt as if they could tear free from the earth itself. One broke loose and vanished into the dark, its scream lost in the silence that followed. No one came to help him. No one stepped from the tree line. Before we go deeper into the chilling tale of the man who wed the crow girl for a wager and the terrifying truth he uncovered by the 7th night, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep bringing these forgotten, unsettling stories back into the light. Every subscription helps us dig deeper, ask harder questions, and share what others were too afraid to tell. It only takes a second, but it means the world to us. Thank you. But eyes were watching. Caleb dropped to his knees. The veil tumbled from his grasp like something that no longer wanted to be held. His fingers clawed at his scalp, bloodying the roots of his hair as he rocked forward onto his hands. He gagged, coughed up bile, and spat feathers onto the ground. They fluttered in the dirt like ash from a fire that refused to die. "She was in the chair," he muttered. "She wasn't moving. But I heard it. I heard her. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't even a voice." He looked up, wild-eyed, to no one. The fire went out, and then it was cold. Cold like the dead. But she stood up. She stood up without standing. "Do you understand?" she floated. I swear to God I didn't touch her. I just looked. Another gust blew through the clearing. This time, it came from all directions at once, spiraling, lifting the veil into the air. It danced there, weightless and trembling, before it caught on a branch above and clung to it like something afraid. Behind Caleb, the tent shifted. The flap moved, though there was no wind now. He froze. A sound dry, slow, deliberate rose from within. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It wasn't footsteps, it was claws on wood. Caleb's mouth fell open, but no sound came out this time. Only the whites of his eyes moved, tracking the movement within, trying not to blink. The air around him thickened. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. And then movement. A shadow, tall and hunched, unfolded behind the tent wall like a bird unfurling wings that did not belong to any bird known to man. The wind returned with a shriek, and the trees bent inward as if bowing to something ancient and owed. He ran. Not toward the town, but into the trees, toward the place she told him never to go. The bundle of feathers slipped from his grip and scattered into the dark, carried by the wind. But the veil stayed, caught high above, still dripping, still swaying, watching. And from the tent, the scraping stopped. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the sky hung heavy over Gable Hollow, the clouds swollen like they were holding their breath. In the town square, men loitered under the porch of the saloon, boots kicked up, whiskey glinting in the amber light of swinging lanterns. Laughter rang too loud, like a bluff at the edge of something no one wanted to name. Beneath the sound of dice and slurred wagers, the air carried the scent of wet iron, storm coming, or maybe blood. It was hard to tell sometimes in a town like this. Inside the saloon, the fire popped and hissed like it was eavesdropping. Caleb Markham leaned against the bar, cheeks flushed, silver ringlets of hair clinging to his temple. He'd already had too much to drink, and he was doing what drunk men do best, talking loud, saying nothing, and trying to turn recklessness into entertainment. "She don't speak," he said, waving his glass toward the window like he might summon her with a gesture. "She don't blink, don't eat, don't even piss far as I know. Hell, she might not even be real." The room chuckled uneasily. One man muttered something about bad luck with birds. Another crossed himself beneath the table. Old Brandt, the saloon owner, leaned forward with the calm weight of someone who knew exactly when to push a man too far. "Tell you what," he said, voice like gravel smoothed over with money. "You marry her, 1 week, sleep under the same roof, share meals, kiss her goodnight, if she'll let you. You do that, stay married the full 7, and I give you half the deed to this place." That hushed the room. The fire crackled, spitting sparks like the words themselves had bitten it. Caleb laughed. It was loud and full of bravado, the kind of laugh men use when they've already lost and don't know it yet. "You want me to shack up with a mute girl who smells like smoke and speaks to crows? For half the deed? Hell, pour the wine. I'll wed her tonight." No one moved. "She ain't gonna say no," someone said from the corner. "Never says much at all." "Who'd officiate?" another asked. "The preacher," Brent replied. "He's married worse." They all laughed at that. Even the preacher, sipping quietly in the shadows, gave a short, humorless nod. No one asked what the girl would want. No one mentioned her real name, not that anyone remembered it. They called her the Crow Girl. She lived in a cabin past the alder grove, where birds circled like omens and nothing grew taller than her door. She came into town only for salt and needles, and always paid in feathers, long, black, gleaming things that never seemed dirty. She never spoke, never begged. She just looked at you, like she saw something behind your face you didn't know was there. Caleb stood, drink sloshing in his hand, and turned toward the door. "Let's go ask the bride, shall we?" No one followed him. The laughter faded the moment he stepped outside. He whistled to himself, sharp and careless, but it echoed too long. The path to her cabin wasn't lit. The trees leaned in closer than they had that morning. Above him, something winged, cut through the dark with a single slow cry. He kept walking. He didn't hear the second one. The town hall of Gable Hollow had never hosted anything like a wedding, not really. It had been a courtroom once, a schoolhouse before that, and now it mostly served as a place for men to argue about taxes they didn't pay and rules they didn't follow. But that morning, they dragged in benches, dusted off the mayor's chair, and tacked up an old curtain to cover the broken window. Someone lit candles, someone else uncorked whiskey. And when Caleb Markham sauntered in with a grin carved into his face and a half-buttoned shirt, it was clear the ceremony would be more spectacle than sacrament. She was already there, the Crow Girl. Dressed in the same dark shawl she always wore, feathers sewn into the hem in a pattern that looked like talons or wings, depending on how the light caught it. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, unmoving. Her eyes, those glassy, ink-black eyes, never left him. Not once. Mayor Trask adjusted his collar, sweat collecting under his chin despite the cold. "Now, I'll need to make this formal," he said, thumbing through the cracked book of town ordinances as if any of them mattered. "This here arrangement is to be witnessed and affirmed by standing members of the Hollow. That includes myself, Preacher Wallace, and the parties directly involved." Caleb raised his hand lazily, present and accounted for. Preacher Wallace looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but he stood beside the girl all the same, one hand resting on the Bible like it might shield him. "Do you, Caleb Markham, agree to take this woman as your lawful wife, under the terms set forth, that you will remain married for no fewer than 7 nights, share meals, shelter, and conversation should she offer it, and that Should you flee or renounce your vow before the 7th dawn? You forfeit all claims to the saloon, your winnings, and your good name? I do, Caleb said, smirking. And I'll take the silence as her agreement. The girl didn't speak, didn't nod. She simply stood, walked to his side, and held out her hand. The room fell dead quiet. She wore no ring, but around her wrist was a leather thong, tied with something that looked like bone. She untied it, let the charm fall into his palm. It was small, pale, and carved with what looked like a crow's eye just one. When Caleb looked up, she was already back in place beside the preacher. Very well, Mayor Trask said, clearing his throat. Witnessed and sealed. The wager stands. The marriage is binding. There was a beat of silence. Then the saloon crowd gathered by the back wall, bottles in hand, broke into raucous cheers. Someone slapped Caleb on the back. Another passed a coin purse forward. A man near the doorway muttered, "Fool's richer than he was yesterday, but not for long." Caleb turned to face his new bride. "Well then," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Shall we?" She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink. The candles flickered. The preacher crossed himself. The charm in Caleb's hand grew warm. And outside, from somewhere past the alder grove, a crow screamed once long and low, as if it already knew how this story would end. The cabin stood crooked at the edge of the alder grove, its roof sagging like it had bowed to something older than time. No smoke rose from the chimney. No path led to the door. It was the kind of place you passed without looking, pretending you hadn't seen the feathers nailed above the frame or the wind chimes made from teeth. Caleb paused just outside the threshold, unsure whether to knock or turn back. The air smelled like wet wood, and something sweeter beneath it, like decay dressed in perfume. He knocked once anyway. The sound barely echoed before the door opened on its own. No creak, no hinges groaning, just a slow parting of the wood, as if the house had been waiting. She was inside, sitting cross-legged near the hearth, fingers stitching through a bundle of dark cloth. She looked up, but said nothing. Her eyes reflected the light oddly, like onyx with oil pooled behind them. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped in. The floorboards shifted under his boots like they remembered better feet. I was told to come take your measurements," he said, holding out a spool of twine like it was proof of good intentions. "For the dress." She didn't take it. Instead, she stood without sound and faced him, arms at her sides. The room was small but dense, overfilled with hanging herbs, scattered feathers, jars that seemed to hold smoke rather than substance. The walls were lined with bones, neatly arranged. Some were birds' wings splayed open, ribs tiny and delicate. Others were not birds. One femur in the corner was unmistakably human. Caleb blinked, unsure if he'd really seen it. She didn't seem to notice his unease, or perhaps she did and simply didn't care. He moved forward, hesitant. She tilted her head slightly, giving him permission or warning. He took the twine and began to wrap it gently around her shoulders, then her waist. Her skin was cool beneath the fabric, but not cold. Not lifeless, just still. As he worked, his eyes wandered to a shelf stacked with polished skulls, each crowned with a black feather. To a circle of stones etched with symbols he didn't recognize. And finally, to the black trunk at the far side of the room. It looked ancient, carved from some wood that drank light instead of reflecting it. Its surface shimmered with faint ridges, almost like scars, and something inside it hummed not loudly, but like a pressure in the air. Caleb's gaze lingered. She moved then, quick, a single gesture, arm outstretched and palm flat like a knife. "Do not open the black trunk." Her voice was low and even, but it cut clean through him. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. The words carried no accent, no warmth, just clarity. A rule carved into stone. Caleb nodded too fast, suddenly aware of the weight of the air in his chest. She turned away and returned to her sewing. He didn't speak again. That night, he slept in the back of the tailor's shop, on a borrowed cot with a half-empty flask beside him. He dreamt of birds, hundreds of them screaming as they flew in circles, wings bent wrong, eyes missing. One landed on his chest, its beak splitting open like a mouthful of teeth, and whispered in her voice, "You look too long." He woke with a start, feathers in his mouth. Real ones. Or at least, they felt real. The flask was empty, the window was open, and somewhere far off, in the direction of the grove, something was breathing his name. Rain beat down on the chapel like a warning, not a blessing. It came in waves, hammering the roof with such force that the rafters groaned and dripped at the corners, leaking into pews that hadn't held a congregation in years. Gable Hollow's little church had been cleaned up for the occasion. Someone had swept the dust, lit the lanterns, even strung dried wildflowers along the pulpit, but none of it mattered under the weight of that storm. It made the place feel smaller, tighter, like something was watching from above, pressing in. The benches were packed, not with friends or family, but with townsfolk hungry for spectacle. They clutched their coats tight against the damp and whispered behind fingers, their laughter short and nervous. The air smelled of wet wool and old wood, the kind that creaked even when no one moved. Caleb stood at the front, freshly shaven and too proud by half, a red carnation tucked into his lapel like he thought it made him noble. He kept tapping the heel of his boot on the floor, a rhythm that only made the silence stretch longer between the thunder. Then the door opened. She stood in the threshold, framed in rain and shadow, barefoot and veiled in feathers. The hem of her gown clung to her ankles, soaked from the path. And her veil, if you could call it that, was made of stitched raven plumes, long and glossy, some still beaded with water. Her hair was braided down her back in a tight, spiraled knot, and the only sound in the room was the water dripping from her shoulders onto the stone. She walked forward without being summoned. No music played. No one rose. The preacher cleared his throat, voice brittle. We are gathered here today." Her gaze snapped toward him. He stopped mid-sentence, as if struck by a hand he hadn't seen. Caleb laughed. Not a small laugh. A bark, loud and hollow. He turned in place, arms out like he was greeting an audience. "Y'all look like you've seen a ghost. Come on, it's just a wedding. She's not gonna bite well, maybe she will." He winked at the preacher. "Can't say I'd mind." No one joined in. The Crow Girl took her place beside him without a word. She didn't take his arm, didn't glance his way, just stood still, hands folded, veil unmoving in the wind that slipped through the walls. The preacher tried again. "Do you, Caleb Markham, take this woman?" "I do," he interrupted, too quickly. "And do you?" "I do." He grinned wider now, nudging her elbow. "Come on now, let's not drag this out. Don't want the storm washing us both away, do we?" She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her veil shifted once, but her body remained still. The preacher hesitated, eyes darting to the mayor and back again. Then he shut the book. "Then by the authority granted to me by Gable Hollow and whatever else dares to watch tonight, you are now husband and wife." A crack of thunder answered for them. Outside, a crow cried 3 times in quick succession, then went silent. Inside, no one clapped, no one cheered. Caleb took her hand and tried to raise it like a champion in a boxing match. She let him, limp as thread. The rain came harder then, like it had been waiting for the moment the words were spoken. And somewhere in the eaves, above the rafters, something small scratched at the wood once, twice, then stopped. The preacher did not stay to bless them, no one did. The door closed behind them with a sound like breath held too long, soft, deliberate, final. The cabin had changed in the hours since he last stood in it. Or maybe he had. The same jars lined the shelves, the same ring of stones on the floor, the same bundle of feathers above the hearth, but the air had thickened, as if the house had exhaled something it had been holding back. Caleb hesitated just inside the doorway, one boot dripping rain onto the wood, the other still planted in the mud outside. He looked over his shoulder, half expecting someone from the town to be watching. But the path was empty now. The trees had closed around it like a wound. She entered first, as if the place remembered her weight. Her steps made no sound. She left no prints on the floor. She said nothing. He followed, trying not to show the shiver that ran down his spine as the air inside swallowed the warmth from his coat. The fire was dead in the hearth. No smoke. No glow. Just the scent of something that might have once been herbs but now reeked of damp earth and iron. She crossed the room without looking at him, peeled off her wet shawl, and hung it on a wooden peg near the stove. Then she sat in the same chair as before, the one near the stones, and folded her hands in her lap. Her veil remained on, feathers slick and heavy with rain. She didn't speak, didn't move, didn't look. Caleb cleared his throat. "Well, guess we're married now." He laughed, a single puff of breath that didn't go anywhere. "Hell of a ceremony. Hope you weren't expecting cake." Silence. He set his satchel down beside the bed, glanced around for dry wood, but found none. The windows were fogged, the black trunk in the corner unchanged. Still humming. "Right," he muttered, fumbling for the tinderbox. He struck a flame, lit a candle on the shelf. Then another, and another. The glow painted her face in fractured pieces, casting her features behind the veil like a mask in a dream. The last candle sputtered, flared, then died. So did the second. And the third. One by one, the flames snuffed themselves out, until only the tiniest ember on the wick of the first candle remained, flickering like a heartbeat. Caleb froze. Something brushed his shoulder. It was too soft to be a hand, too heavy to be wind. It didn't push, it grazed, like feathers trailing across skin. He spun, heart clawing at his ribs, fumbling for the lantern hanging on the wall. It took 3 tries to strike it, the flame stubborn. When it finally flared to life, he held it high, and nearly dropped it. She was standing beside the bed. She had not been there a second ago. The chair behind her was empty now. Her feet were bare, touching nothing. Her arms were at her sides, but her veil floated, not fluttered, floated. It hovered above her head, slow and steady, suspended by no wind. The feathers twisted gently, lifting like breath was rising from her scalp. Beneath it, her face was hidden in shadow. Caleb stepped back. She took a single step forward. The lantern's flame shrank, and then she sat down on the bed beside him, slow, deliberate, and the veil settled softly back onto her head. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. They found him at dawn, clawing his way down the gravel path that led from the alder grove. Mud streaked across his cheeks like war paint, eyes open wide but useless. Jeb Carter, the wiry old miner who never left the mountains without a pickaxe in one hand and a bottle in the other, was stumbling like a newborn fawn, both hands outstretched, trying to find the ground. He screamed when they touched him. Didn't stop screaming for hours. Word spread fast. By midday, the whole of Gable Hollow had heard that Jeb had gone to spy on the newlyweds the night before. Curiosity, he'd claimed. Just wanted to see if the rumors were true, if she really slept standing up, if she really breathed only when the moon was high. He never made it past the window. The bartender said Jeb came in just after sundown, smelling like copper and rain, eyes wide and twitching. Asked if anyone would bet him $5 he couldn't get close enough to see her face without getting caught. Someone laughed. Someone else handed him a flask and said, "Go on then. Let us know if the bird sings." He never drank from the flask. He left without another word, and by morning he was screaming through the trees, blind as a mole, blood leaking from the corners of his eyes like ink. When they finally got him to lie still, 3 men holding him down, preacher whispering prayers that sounded more like begging, he spoke only once. The room hushed to hear it. "I saw wings where there should have been arms, folded, tall as the roof, but they didn't flap. They shivered, like they were remembering something. They asked him what else. His voice dropped, hoarse and broken. She wasn't talking. But there was a voice, not hers, not his. The floor was speaking. It said my name. No one asked what it said after that. They didn't want to know. They wrapped his head in linen and led him to the edge of town. He couldn't stop shaking. The preacher tried to place a hand on his shoulder, but Jeb recoiled like the man was fire. She saw me, he whispered. Not just with her eyes. With all of her. Every piece of her saw me. And it knew. It knew I lied about the claim on that mine. It saw what I did to Samuel when he fell. It knew. That night, the town shut early, doors locked, lamps dimmed. No one looked toward the grove. Not even Caleb returned to town. And yet, from the treetops, the crows stayed watching. Somewhere beyond the branches, behind the fogged glass of the cabin's one crooked window, something waited in the dark. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But she saw. And she remembered. Would you have stayed if it meant dying with your eyes open? The second night began with a quiet, so absolute it rang in Caleb's ears like a scream underwater. The kind of silence that felt carved out, made hollow on purpose. Even the crows had vanished from the grove, as if they'd flown too close to something sacred and learned better. Inside the cabin, the fire refused to catch. He fed it dry bark, fat wood, even splinters from a broken chair leg. It sparked, flared, and then guttered out with a hiss, smoke curling up like a warning swallowed too late. The hearthstone stayed cold. She sat in the rocking chair, same as the night before, still veiled, still silent. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, unmoving. The chair rocked without sound, no creak or groan, just the slight forward back motion like breath. She hadn't acknowledged him since they crossed the threshold. No nod, no glance. Not even the faintest shift of her head. Caleb lit 3 candles and placed them around the room, one on the windowsill, one on the mantel, one by the mirror above the basin. Their flames twitched nervously, shadows crawling across the bones on the wall in jagged shapes. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't feel like shouting into a church filled with ghosts. Sometime past midnight, he heard it. Scratch. A single drag of claw against the wooden window frame. He turned sharply, heart quickening. The candle there flickered, but nothing waited outside. No wind, no movement. Just the trees breathing in the distance. Then scratch. This time on the floor, he looked down. The sound had come from beneath the boards, just under his feet. A slow, scraping crawl, like something was pressing claws against the underside, tracing circles in the grain. He stepped back. The sound followed. She didn't move. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Now the door. He spun toward it, half expecting it to burst open, for something to come writhing in from the night with eyes made of glass and a mouth too wide. But the door held. The latch trembled. But nothing entered. The fire gave up entirely, leaving only the candlelight. Scratch. The sound circled him now. Window to floor. Floor to door. Door to wall. A loop. A ritual. Like something caged was testing the seams of its prison. Caleb backed toward the bed, his hand gripping the cold frame of the lantern, though he hadn't the nerve to light it. She rocked. And watched. Or maybe she didn't. He still hadn't seen her eyes. When sleep finally came, it was not restful. It was a surrender. He drifted under like a man drowning in oil, thick, dark, and clinging. He awoke just before dawn. The candles had burned to nothing. The rocking chair was empty. His hands were black, coated in soot, though he hadn't touched the hearth, not ash. Soot. Like the residue from something burned but not clean. He stumbled to the basin, splashing water on his face, When he looked up, the mirror was fogged, a breath mark traced in the center. Too high to be his. And just for a moment, barely long enough to scream, a handprint bloomed beside it. From the inside, Caleb didn't mean to run. He told himself it was just a walk to clear his head, to escape the thick quiet of the cabin pressing against his ribs like a stone. But by the time the trees swallowed the trail behind him, he was already sweating, already moving too fast for thought, brushing aside branches that seemed to reach for his coat with twig fingers. The grove stretched deeper than he remembered. The path curved where it hadn't the day before. Everything felt off, warped, wrong, in a way that had no name. He kept going. The further he walked, the colder it grew. The birds didn't sing. Even the crows were gone now, and their absence made the woods feel hollow. He passed a tree with a ribbon tied to its trunk, weathered red, faded near to pink. Then another, then 3 in a row. He didn't stop to wonder what they marked. Then he heard it. A rustle, not behind, ahead. He slowed, raised a branch like a club. It shook slightly in his hand. She was crouched near the roots of a fallen tree, half covered in moss, skin pale as candle wax and eyes empty wide sockets, staring blankly at the space where sunlight should have been. Her hair hung in clumps, tangled with dirt. Her dress was little more than shredded linen. But she didn't flinch when she heard him. She turned her head, just slightly, toward the sound of his breath, and smiled. "You're her husband," she rasped. Caleb stepped back. The woman didn't follow. She sat in the earth like she'd grown there. "I was like you," she said. "But I ran. I broke the promise, lied to her face." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Every instinct told him to leave. She tilted her head. "She saved me." "From what?" The woman laughed, a sound like stones dropped into an empty well. "From what I was." She sees truth. She doesn't punish for sin, only for lies. Caleb frowned. "She's cursed," he muttered. "Not holy, not a saint." "No," the woman whispered. "She's a mirror. She only shows what's already there." Her blind eyes locked on him, as if sight had nothing to do with seeing. "She only takes what you pretend not to carry." He shook his head. "I haven't lied to her." The woman's smile faded. "You just did." A low gust moved through the trees. The ribbons tied to the trunks twisted once, then fell still. "You don't understand," he said quickly. "It's just a bet, a joke. I didn't mean harm." "She knows what you meant," the woman said. "She knows." Caleb stepped away, voice rising. "I haven't done anything." The woman didn't reply. She only bowed her head and whispered something he couldn't hear, or maybe refused to. When he turned to leave, the woods felt different again. Deeper, heavier, like each tree had leaned in to listen and decided what he was worth. Behind him, the woman vanished. Not with sound, not with motion, just gone. The wind picked up. Somewhere, a crow called out, not sharp and laughing, but long and low, as if mourning. He walked back to the cabin, faster now. And every step whispered the lie he wouldn't stop telling himself. He had time. She didn't know. He was still safe. The third night arrived without fanfare. No thunder. No rain. Just a sky sealed in clouds. And a silence so deep, it felt like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, with a half-full bottle in his hand, and no fire in the hearth. He hadn't tried to light one tonight. The cold didn't bother him anymore. The warmth never lasted long in this place anyway. It was always watching, always waiting, like it wanted him still. She sat in the rocking chair, as she always did, unmoving, unblinking. The feathers of her veil caught the dim candlelight, flickering like oil on water. She hadn't spoken since the warning on the first day. Hadn't moved except to stand beside his bed that one night. He didn't know if she slept. He didn't know if she could. He sipped from the bottle. It burned less now. When the first sound left her, he nearly dropped it. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a song, not in the way he understood music. It was a hum, almost too low to hear, so quiet it vibrated in the back of his teeth. He froze. His breath hitched. She rocked forward. The hum deepened. It grew, layered with something else, a rasp beneath the tone, like words trying to rise without shape. He turned toward her, slowly, afraid to interrupt. Her mouth never moved. And yet he knew what she was singing. He didn't recognize the sound, but he recognized the feeling. A boy's scream, a brother's hand slipping from his own. A river, swollen with spring melt, dragging a small body under. A lie told in the dark. He ran ahead. I couldn't catch him. The hum wrapped around the memory like vines, pulling it to the surface, twisting tighter until it bloomed in full. His knees hit the floor. He didn't remember standing. Didn't remember the bottle falling from his hand and rolling into the shadows. The song shifted again. Now it was a different echo. A knife under a pillow. A man on his knees begging for a loan repaid in bruises. Blood on the handle. His own hands scrubbing at stone until they blistered. The lie again. It was self-defense. Her voice, if it was her voice, never rose above that hum. Never gained melody. But each note pressed against a door he'd shut long ago and whispered until the lock gave way. The candlelight fluttered. The room swam. And Caleb wept. Not the tears of guilt or apology. These were the tears of something cracked open. Something long buried, now too exposed to deny. He didn't know why he cried, only that he couldn't stop. His body shook with it. His breath came in gasps. His hands clutched at his chest, as if trying to tear the sound out of his heart. She rocked. The fire in the hearth sparked to life on its own. Just a single flame, dancing low and quiet. And through it, the song continued. Not loud, not cruel. Just true. The meeting was held behind locked doors, in the back room of the old apothecary, where the smell of dust and dried herbs clung to the walls like memory. Only 4 men were present. Mayor Trask, Preacher Wallace, Elias the millwright, and old Josiah Turn, who spoke only when silence grew too long to tolerate. They didn't sit. None of them could stay still. The lantern on the center table swayed with the tension in the room, casting long, uneven shadows that crawled over the jars on the shelves like hands reaching for something just out of reach. This ain't right, Elias said, voice low but sharp. The miner's gone blind. Caleb looks like he's aged 10 years since Monday. She never speaks, never eats. Something's feeding on him. And we're standing here holding matches while the house burns. Preacher Wallace stood near the window, his collar undone, eyes hollow. She's not harming him, not directly, but it's wearing on him. I've seen possession before. This isn't that. This is something older, closer to judgment than curse. Mayor Trask exhaled through his nose, a long, tired sound. It's happened before. They all turned toward him. He nodded, slowly, the words dragging their way out like rot from a sealed well. Not in my time. But my father spoke of it. A girl from the far edge of the valley, married off on a dare. The man went mad on the 6th night. They found him walking through the snow barefoot, repeating her name. His tongue was black. No one spoke of it again. And the girl? Wallace asked. Gone, like she never existed. Josiah coughed, a dry, brittle rattle. You saw what she is, didn't you? He said to no one in particular. She's not like us. Never was. She wears a body like a coat, but that thing's been watching this town for years, feeding on its lies. Elias shook his head. We have to break the bet, call it off. Get the boy out before he loses what's left of himself. That's not how it works, Trask muttered. The wager was sealed. Witnessed, terms spoken, forfeit or fulfillment, only two ends. There has to be a third. There is, the preacher said. But it's worse. They waited. She has to agree. A silence settled over the room like dust in still air. Elias laughed bitterly. And who's going to ask her? You? Me? You saw what happened to Jeb. She's not violent, Trask said. No, Elias snapped. She's honest. And that's worse. They all knew what he meant. There are lies you carry like coins in your pocket, forgotten, until you reach in and feel their shape. She made you remember. Made you feel the sharp edges again. Josiah stepped forward, finally. Then we send him. Caleb. The room went colder. Even the flame in the lantern seemed to shrink back. No, Trask said. He's already too far gone. We send him now, we lose him forever. Wallace looked at the floor. Then we pray she shows mercy. No one suggested knocking on the cabin door. Not that night. Not ever. The fourth night began with a strange calm. The kind that prickled beneath the skin, not peace, but pause. The trees outside didn't rustle. The floorboards didn't creak. Even the usual tapping, scratching, whispering, all of it had gone still. As if the house itself were holding its breath for what was to come. Caleb didn't speak much anymore. His words had dried out somewhere between the second bottle and the third sleepless night. He moved like a man walking across thin ice, careful not to disturb what lurked beneath. He'd stopped trying to make jokes. The silence swallowed them before they ever reached her. She sat in the rocking chair again. As always. Veiled, unmoving, her hands resting on her lap like folded wings. But tonight, she watched him differently. Not with malice, not with pity. It felt more like waiting. He laid on the bed, boots still on, arm across his chest like a man already half buried. He didn't want to sleep, not after the last time, not after the song. But exhaustion wore him like a cloak. His eyes closed. And when they opened again, it was there. On his pillow. A single, obsidian black egg. Its surface shimmered faintly, not smooth but patterned with faint ridges, like feathers pressed into cooled glass. It pulsed slightly in the candlelight, as though it held a breath within. Caleb jolted upright, heart leaping, eyes darting toward her. She was still in the chair. Still unmoving. But her gaze, he felt it. Like weight on his spine. He reached for the egg. It was warm. Not hot, but alive. The moment his fingers curled around it, a faint crack sounded, then another. A seam split clean down the middle, revealing a hollow interior. Inside, resting in a cradle of ash and what looked like downy feathers, was a silver ring. Not new, not polished, old. Worn smooth by time, but unmistakably his. And on the inside, etched so small he had to squint to see, was a name. Micah. The name he had never spoken aloud. Not to her, not to anyone in Gable Hollow. Not since the river. His breath caught like a hook in his throat. How, he rasped, clutching the ring. How do you know that name? She didn't answer. He stood, crossed the room, held the ring up like an accusation. How do you know this name? She slowly raised her hand. Not to take the ring, not to strike. Just one finger. Pressed gently to her lips. A hush. Not just in the room. In his mind. It silenced something inside him that had screamed for years. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't mocking him. She was telling him the truth didn't belong to words anymore. Only knowing. Only remembering. He dropped to his knees, the ring falling from his grip and landing silently on the wood. She didn't move, didn't rise. The egg was gone. But the feathers remained, 3 of them, placed neatly in a triangle on the bed. And somewhere outside, the crows began to sing. Not their usual cries, not screeches or calls. A low, humming sound. Like mourning. Or recognition. They didn't bother sending a letter or knocking politely at the door. They waited until sunrise, then came as a group, 8 men, a few armed, all grim-faced. Caleb heard the horses before he saw the dust, then the boots crunching gravel outside the cabin. When he opened the door, blinking into the gray light, the preacher was at the front, hat in hand, with Mayor Trask just behind, his expression carved from stone. "You'll come with us," Trask said, offering no reason and no option. Caleb didn't argue. He barely had the strength. His hand still bore streaks of soot from the 3rd night, and the ring she had given him or returned to him pressed cold against his chest from where he wore it on a chain. He followed them in silence, past the trees that bent low like they were listening, past the alder grove now stripped bare of crows, past the saloon that hadn't opened in days. They took him to the old meeting hall. It wasn't a courthouse anymore, but it served well enough for judgment. Inside, the elders stood in a circle, not seated, standing like men, waiting for blood to be spilled. Trask cleared his throat and spoke first. "We've allowed this to continue too long," he said. "Gable Hollow doesn't take kindly to spirits nesting in its heart. You brought her in under a wager, Caleb. You married her for coin. That was your choice. But what walks beside you now isn't a wife. It's something else." "She hasn't harmed me," Caleb said, voice thin. Not like you think." "No," said Preacher Wallace, stepping forward. "But she's changed you, and that's worse." Josiah Turn, oldest of them all, lifted his chin. "You don't smile, you don't lie. You walk like a man who's been skinned and left to walk the world with nothing between his heart and the wind. That ain't natural. That ain't survivable." Trask stepped closer. "So we'll offer you a choice." The room held still. "You end the bet. Walk away before the 7th night. But the forfeit will be your tongue." That was the wager. Speak no lie, speak no truth, speak no more. Caleb's mouth went dry. "Or," Trask continued, "you finish it. Fulfill the marriage, 7 nights, no breach, and you'll get more than just the saloon. We'll pay you in gold, enough to leave this town, to forget this ever happened." Caleb looked down at his hands. One trembled. The other was clenched so tightly his fingernails had drawn blood. "You're asking me to choose between silence and her." "No," Wallace said quietly. "We're asking you to choose who you want to be when this is over." He didn't answer at first, just nodded. Once, a slow, heavy motion. "I'll finish it," he said. His voice barely carried. As they led him back, no one spoke. But at the edge of town, where the rooftops caught the early gold of morning light, she stood barefoot, veiled, the feathers of her garments stirring in a breeze that hadn't touched the rest of the street. Watching. She didn't come down. She didn't follow. She only watched as he walked beneath her, and the sun behind her made her shadow stretch long across the road, longer than her body should allow. And Caleb, for the first time, didn't dare look up. By the time the 5th night fell over Gable Hollow, the cabin's windows had gone dark, no flicker of candlelight, no shadow shifting behind the curtains, just the faint smell of smoke and wet pine seeping through the walls. A strip of cloth, one of Caleb's, torn from his coat, hung limp from a branch by the path, soaked and forgotten. The townsfolk kept their distance, though some lingered behind fences or peered through shutters, watching, waiting. Crows came in numbers no one had seen before. Not just a handful circling the grove, but dozens, hundreds, silent and still, perched on rooftops, lined along fences, staring down from church beams and saloon eaves. They didn't caw, didn't shift, just waited like witnesses too solemn to speak. The cabin door had been nailed shut from the inside. That much the mayor confirmed after creeping close enough to check, though his knuckles never touched the wood. 4 iron nails, one at each corner. Symbols carved faintly above the frame, fresh, not there before. Some said they heard sounds soft chanting at midnight, a thud against the wall, weeping in a language they couldn't place. Others claimed the trees had moved closer, the grove inching forward one root at a time like it wanted to swallow the cabin whole. No one approached. No one knocked. Even the preacher stayed away. When the 6th night passed and the 7th morning bled gold into the mist, the crows finally moved. One by one, they took flight not with frenzy, but with ceremony. A slow rise, a spiral upward, until the sky was thick with wings that didn't flap in rhythm but trembled, like wind trapped in a cage. Then the door opened. Just after sunrise. No hand pushed it wide. It creaked open on its own, slow and deliberate, revealing the dark inside like a mouth parting for breath. Caleb stepped out. Or rather something that looked like Caleb. He was gaunt now, the hollows of his cheeks shadowed and sunken. His skin had gone sallow, tinged with ash. His eyes, once full of arrogance, laughter, fear, now held none of it, just glassy silence. Like looking into a lake at winter's edge. He wore no coat, no boots. His feet were bare, streaked with soot and blood. His shirt hung open, damp with sweat or something darker. Around his neck, the silver ring still swung from its chain, though it no longer gleamed. He said nothing as he walked down the steps. Just moved forward, one foot at a time, like the earth was unfamiliar beneath him. When someone finally dared to whisper his name, he paused, turned, and spoke in a voice that had forgotten how to be loud. "She's still inside." That was all. The door behind him creaked again. Closed. Not slammed. Closed. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Whatever happened in those 2 nights hadn't left bruises, or scars, or stories. It had left space, a hollowed-out silence that followed Caleb through the street like something invisible and loyal. And when he reached the chapel steps, he collapsed, not like a man fainting, but like a soldier finally allowed to kneel. From the rooftop above the cabin, one last crow remained, watching, waiting. And behind the closed door, no sound came. No breath. No movement. But the town knew she was still in there. And she was listening. The cabin was too quiet that night. Not the fragile hush of peace, but the thick, pressing stillness of a place holding its breath before a scream. The hearth was cold. The candles had long since burned to wax stubs. The floor felt uneven beneath Caleb's bare feet, like the house had shifted, or like time had twisted just enough to warp the boards. It was the 7th night. He stood near the center of the room, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, arms hanging limp at his sides. He had cleaned himself, barely, washed the soot from his skin, combed his fingers through his hair until they caught on nothing but the knot in his own thoughts. His shirt clung to him damp with sweat, though the air was cold as stone. She stood across from him. For the first time, she wasn't veiled. Her face was pale, smooth, unreadable. Eyes dark as pitch and endless, not angry, not soft, but vast, like looking into something that didn't belong to this earth. Her mouth didn't move. She never blinked, and yet her presence felt louder than a scream. In her hand was a single black feather. Long, impossibly perfect. It shimmered not with light, but with memory. She stepped forward and held it out. He didn't move to take it. His fingers curled inward on reflex, like his body remembered pain it hadn't felt yet. Her voice came not from her lips, but from the space between them. "Give this to the one you love most." The words weren't soft, they didn't ask. They commanded. His breath caught, his throat clenched. What happens if I can't?" She didn't answer. He stared at the feather. It looked like nothing, just a bird's cast-off, fragile, weightless. But the air around it shimmered, rippling like heat off pavement. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the quill, heat exploded through his skin. He screamed. The feather ignited not in flame, but in light. Black and white at once, searing without fire, burning without smoke. It pulsed in his palm like a heartbeat, and he tried to drop it, but it clung to his skin, merged with it, sinking into the flesh as if it belonged there. He dropped to his knees. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. The pain was not just physical. It reached inward, tearing through memory, slicing through thought. He saw Micah's face, his brother's eyes, the river, the hand that slipped, the lie, the silence. And then the pain stopped. He gasped, looked down. In the center of his palm, where the feather had burned away, was a mark, circular, perfect, etched into the skin like ironwork. A ring of eyes, each one open, each one watching. He looked up. She was gone. Not vanished like smoke or shadow, but absent. Like she'd never been. No sound, no scent. The cabin was empty. Only the mark remained. And outside, every crow in Gable Hollow cried out in unison, one long, echoing note that rang through the trees and settled in the bones of the living, like a bell that would never stop tolling. Caleb fell forward, clutching his hand, and howled. Not in pain, not in grief, but in knowing. Because now he understood what it meant to love something more than yourself, and what it cost to prove it. The saloon was nearly empty when Caleb pushed open the doors, but those who were there froze the moment they saw him. His face was drawn and hollow, his shirt torn open at the chest, boots caked in dried blood and ash. His left hand was wrapped in linen, soaked through with something dark. His eyes, once sharp with mischief, once glazed with liquor, now burned with something else entirely, something ancient, something haunted. He didn't speak as he crossed the floor. The doors swung shut behind him and stayed that way, as though even the wind had decided to keep out. At the bar, Brant the saloon keeper stood polishing a glass. He looked up, ready with some tired quip, until Caleb slammed something down in front of him. A single black feather. It didn't bend or flutter like it should have. It struck the wood with the weight of a nail in a coffin. The room held its breath. Caleb's voice cracked the silence. No one wins a wager with a spirit. He said it not as a warning, but as a verdict. And then the floor cracked. It began beneath his boots, fine lines, etched into the wood like lightning frozen in time, then spiderwebbed outward. The bottles on the shelves trembled. A low groan rolled through the walls, deep and guttural, like something buried under the floorboards had stirred for the first time in years. The mirrors behind the bar shattered. All at once. Not from pressure or impact, but as if they'd been struck by sound too low for human ears. Shards fell in perfect silence, glittering like frozen feathers in the lantern light. People ran. Chairs scraped, boots thundered. Men shoved past each other like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Only Brant remained, eyes fixed on the feather, mouth moving without words. He wasn't praying. He wasn't cursing. He was counting, as if trying to reckon the cost before it was too late. Caleb didn't look at him. He turned, slow and deliberate, and walked out the way he came. The doors swung shut again behind him, and this time they stayed shut like they were afraid to breathe. By sunrise, the story had spread. The saloon's floor was split clean down the center. The mirrors were gone, every last one shattered into slivers too sharp to sweep. The feather had vanished. No one could find it, though some swore they saw it sink into the wood like ink into paper. And Preacher Wallace Gable Hollow's voice of reason, the one who had said, "She's not harming him," was found dead in his quarters. No wound, no mark, just cold. Mouth open, filled with feathers. Not stuffed. Grown. Soft, black pin feathers curled between his teeth, down his throat, as if they had blossomed there in the night. The town went still after that. No bells rang. No sermons were held. Even the crows fell silent. And somewhere out in the woods, far beyond the reach of roads or prayer, the alder trees rustled without wind. Because something had been paid. But not yet finished. Each spring, just as the frost begins to retreat from the edges of the fields and the first crocuses push up through the thawing earth, the veil returns. No one knows where it comes from. It never drifts in on a wind anyone can feel. It simply appears midair above the chapel roof or the town square or the alder grove, unfolding like a breath held too long. Black feathers stitched along the hem flutter without breeze, glinting in the light like oil on water. It floats for only a few minutes, sometimes less. Then it drifts downward, silent as sleep, until it brushes the ground and vanishes. Every year, someone sees it. Sometimes a child, sometimes a widow. Once, the mayor's wife. They watch it fall, transfixed, unable to look away. And when they blink, when they stir as if from a long nap, they are different. They don't scream, they don't cry, they don't even speak. At first. But they change. Their laughter softens, their tempers vanish. Some begin to confess things no one asked for: old thefts, quiet betrayals, the names of people they once loved but never told. They speak slowly, carefully, as if each word is being weighed before it leaves their lips. And none of them ever lie again. Not even small things. Not even to spare someone pain. The town calls it the blessing now, or the burden, depending on who's speaking. But no one dares to chase it, no one reaches for the veil. They know better. The older folks remember the year the mirrors shattered, the crack that still runs through the saloon floor, the morning the preacher was found. And they remember Caleb. He tends the chapel now, just off the road where the trees begin. He keeps it clean, sweeps the floors, dusts the pews, lights a candle each night at the altar and lets it burn down without prayer. He rarely speaks. When he does, it's with a voice quiet and low, the kind you hear and remember hours later like a tune hummed through a wall. The children say he's kind, that he never scolds, that when he smiles, it's sad, but honest. He walks without a shadow. No matter the sun's angle or the moon's light, no shape falls behind him. He moves like a man unstuck from the rules of this world, like something took his weight and left only the skin behind. Some say the mark is still there, branded into his palm, a circle of open eyes. He always wears gloves, even in summer. He never leaves town. Never marries. Never lies. Each spring, he watches the veil fall from the chapel steps. He never chases it, never touches it. He only bows his head and waits for it to pass. And when it's gone, when the air returns to normal and the birds begin to sing again, he stands, brushes the dust from his coat, and walks back inside. Because some promises aren't broken by force. They are kept by choice. And some vows, once made, echo forever, even in silence. The story, as the town tells it now, ends with silence. Caleb in the chapel, the veil in the wind. A town made gentler by fear, by truth, by something none of them could name aloud. But that is not where it truly ends. Because she was never a curse. Not in the way curses are usually told. She didn't arrive in a flash of brimstone or dark thunder. She didn't hex crops or poison wells. She didn't ask for blood or payment. She asked only for honesty, for a promise fulfilled, for the weight of one man's word to mean something in a town that had long since stopped believing in its own. She didn't punish sinners, not all of them, only the ones who lied to themselves, the ones who wrapped cruelty in a joke or guilt in silence, the ones who twisted love into power and called it harmless, the ones who buried the truth so deep inside their own chests that they forgot it had a shape. She unburied it. That was her power. Not fire, not death. Memory. She opened the doors inside a man that he had nailed shut, boarded up, painted over, and when he stood in the wreckage of his own pretending, when there was nothing left to perform, she offered him a gift. A feather. A choice. To give it to the one he loved most. To remember who that truly was. And when he chose, when he finally saw that no one else would ever deserve it more than the brother he left behind, she vanished. Not because the test was over, but because her part in it was. The town never asked what she took with her. Perhaps they were afraid to know. But Caleb knows. He feels the absence every morning when he lights the altar candle and watches its flame bend toward nothing. He feels it when his shadow refuses to form. When he speaks a name, and the air grows still around it. When a child tells him the truth about something small, something they didn't want to say, and looks to him for permission to still be loved. He gives it. Because that's what she left in him. Not peace, but the need to protect it. Still, there are questions that linger, even now. Why do the crows still come each spring, circling the chapel before the veil appears? Why do they perch on your windowsill when you tell yourself you're fine? Why do they call to each other at night, not in chaos, but in rhythm, like the turning of a key in a lock you can't see? Maybe they remember something. Maybe they're waiting for you to remember too. Because the truth doesn't rot, it waits. And the longer you bury it, the louder it knocks when the wind grows still and the mirror fogs for no reason. So ask yourself this. When the feather falls, who will you give it to? And when she comes again, not for vengeance, but for keeping, will you be ready to see what you've hidden from even yourself? Or will you hear the crows outside your window and lie anyway? The next time she comes, it might not be Caleb she chooses. It might be you.